Developing today, discussions that Prince William could strip Prince Andrew and then his brother Prince Harry from the royal family altogether, and that plans are now being put in place as to how exactly he would do so as king as a result of the damaging allegations about specifically Prince Andrew, but also Prince Harry.
A new royal storm is brewing, and it centers on Prince William. According to reports, the future king is quietly working behind the scenes to banish 3 of the most controversial royals,
Contained in the explosive new biography entitled by the author Andrew Lownie. Now, what was so fascinating is that this reporting found its way into the Daily Telegraph, which is, of course, the pro-establishment, pro-monarchy broadsheet newspaper, in a feature headlined "Prince No More: How William could strip Andrew of his title," a new book full of excruciating stories about the Duke of York's sex life and financial dealings places pressure on the future king to act. Now, I would argue, based on my reporting, there isn't pressure on the future king, Prince William. Prince William is absolutely desperate to do this, but Prince William is putting pressure on King Charles because William doesn't think this is something that should be left for him to do. Hence this fascinating reporting in the Daily Telegraph, who write, "There is a mechanism the Duke of York may not be pleased to learn, by which Parliament can remove not just a dukedom, but even the title of prince. It would need legislation followed by royal assent from the king, but it is nevertheless technically possible. It would be complicated, blockbuster headline news, and would need the quiet, unofficial backing of the palace. But as a new biography about Prince Andrew and his ex-wife lays out every scandal, indiscretion, and excruciating moment of bad manners over his lifetime, courtiers would be forgiven for swatting up on what is possible." So they say the mechanisms open to King William include giving the option to decline an invite to Andrew to his coronation. There is a precedent there. He could also remove the Order of the Garter and the monarch's personal gift, but it's Parliament, of course, which has the greater powers. It could remove the dukedom via legislation. This will only happen if the royal family wanted to, and I think under Prince William, under King William, they certainly would. The Telegraph concludes, should another attempt with the heft of the government behind it be more successful, Prince Andrew's name could eventually be struck off the roll of the peerage where it is currently listed under York. So, the man behind this bombshell book with us today, of course, Andrew Lownie, alongside our very own, according to Taz, the royal YouTube sensation. So, Andrew, well, you know your book has made a mega impact, right? When the Daily Telegraph is saying that the royal family are now considering what would be pretty extraordinary measures to strip Prince Andrew. What's interesting to me is that I'm told this isn't just about Prince Andrew, though. Prince William also wants to do the same to Prince Harry and Meghan Markle because he doesn't want the 2 children coming into the mix either. So huge impact your book has made. But what do you make of this reporting that these mechanisms are now being openly discussed within the royal family?
Well, I think, as you say, it's interesting. It's in the Telegraph, who are probably the pro royal of the papers, and clearly receive a lot of, shall we say, leaks from the palace. I think they're testing the waters to see the reaction. I think there's a strong sense, certainly reading the comments below articles, a very strong sense that something has to be done. There has to be some sort of sacrificial victim to this to clear out the stables. It's clearly an attempt to sort out both problems at the same time. So, yeah, I think it's a very interesting development. I mean, I think what we're also seeing is that William and Charles are working together in a way with a sort of joint monarchy, in the way the Queen and Charles worked for several years before her death. And there is, I get the sense of preparation for a new reign. So, let's hope it's a long way off. But there's, I think, a strong sense it may be sooner than everyone expects. And
I think you're right.
You say, the feeling is we need to clear the stables before William comes, so he has a clean slate and isn't damaged by what's happened in the past. And it's about stiffening the sinews of the king. William, I think, has a very pragmatic view. He's the guy who's going to carry the can, the future. He doesn't like his uncle. He certainly doesn't like his brother. So he's trying to persuade other members of the family to really, grip this situation and do something. I mean, too often with royal crises, it's reactive rather than trying to seize the initiative. So I welcome this. I welcome also, I hope, a greater scrutiny and transparency in the way they operate, not just about their finances, but about the way that they deal with the press. I mean, there's been too much of sort of private leaking and favors for some and sticks for others. And I think that needs to be a much more open arrangement with the press than has hitherto existed.
Tash, do you think that Charles has been strong enough here? Because it feels a bit unfair leaving all of this to William to deal with.
It would be very unfair. I think the king has had obviously a lot with losing the Queen, taking on the role which he waited his entire life for. I do think personally he needs to drain the swamp, as it were. I think he does need to take control of this with Andrew, with Harry, and with Meghan. Obviously, she only has the titles because Harry has his. And then, of course, their children. It's not about punishing anybody. It's about severing ties. And they can remain family. But when it comes to being a working royal or representing the monarchy and the crown, unfortunately, as long as Andrew, Harry, and Meghan do use their titles, they're allowed to continue to use their titles. I think there can be a misconception that they are still very closely linked with the royal family, which means any more scandals that come out, which they will continue to be, because Andrew seems completely unable to keep his nose out of trouble. And Harry is just as arrogant as his uncle. I think it was a quote actually from an interview that Andrew Lowney did, where it said, he's so stupid that he doesn't realize how stupid he is. And that can be applied to both of them. And the king needs to do this. He needs to do this to make sure that William and Catherine do not have that piled on top of them, which will be a very stressful time, because I do believe it's coming sooner rather than later. I do believe it's not going to be as long as everybody would hope before they have to do that. They have their children, which will still be very young. And I think that he needs to do this for the greater good, for the continuation of the monarchy. And in many instances, I would say the good for the UK and the Commonwealth. I mean, Andrew has really got himself into some very serious trouble.
Andrew, do you see parallels between the two spares?
Well, yes, absolutely. I mean, I don't think they should be complaining about being spares. I think it's a much easier position than being the heir. But yes, there is this. You can see it. I mean, that they have this strong sense of entitlement without actually an equal strong sense of public duty and responsibility. But yeah, there are lots of parallels. The service career to try and contain them, the rather hot-headed and short-tempered nature of the two men. The fact that they are not going to win Brain of Britain, either of them, the fact that they're actually quite weak men with strong wives. I mean, one could go on forever in terms of the associations. I mean, and the parallels going back to, for example, the Duke of Windsor and Wallis Simpson. I mean, I think an interesting parallel too is King Juan Carlos of Greece, who was caught, of course, doing very corrupt things and was banished to Dubai. He actually used to operate in Kazakhstan with Andrew. I suspect that might be another option, exile for Andrew. He's treated well in places like the Middle East.
Do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. They love him there. He's got friends there. He's been given a palace there. He can get up to all sorts of mischief, all sorts.
Prince Harry, Meghan Markle, and Prince Andrew. It's a dramatic claim, but one that reflects growing frustration inside the monarchy. Prince William knows that when he eventually takes the throne, his reign must begin with stability and credibility. The scandals surrounding his brother Harry, sister-in-law Meghan, and Uncle Andrew have weighed heavily on the monarchy's image. For William, the only way forward may be a clean break, removing the distractions that continue to fuel headlines. Harry and Meghan have become a constant source of division. From Oprah to Netflix, to their endless criticisms of the institution.
Yeah,
Feels
and
good. You can play golf.
it would make more sense.
For a retired man, that's not a bad option.
No, it would make more sense. Andrew, of course, the other thing that your book gets into deeply is the Epstein connection with Prince Andrew. And obviously, Epstein is in the news almost as much as he ever has been at the moment. Now, your contention, but I'd love you to explain it, is that actually the ties between Prince Andrew and Jeffrey Epstein are deeper than has previously been revealed, and actually you say longer than was previously revealed. What did you discover?
Absolutely. I mean, Andrew said that he'd only met Epstein in 1999. Well,
Yes.
Alistair Watson, Andrew's private secretary, wrote to the Times and said it was the early 1990s. Steve Hoffenberg, who operated a Ponzi scheme with Epstein, went to prison for 18 years, and when Epstein got off, said they met in 1991. So I think it went on much longer. Andrew was meant to part company in December 2010, the great 5-day visit to say goodbye with a dinner party in his honor. But we now know from legal depositions connected with Jess Slaley and others that he continued to correspond and indeed to meet. I think the interesting question here, which has not really been looked at, is the relationship between Sarah Ferguson and Epstein. There are actually more numbers for Sarah Ferguson in the Black Book than there are for Andrew. I mean, she was flying on the plane in 1998. The first record we have for Andrew is 1999.
So do you think it was Fergie who introduced them rather than Ghislaine?
Yes, I think my reasoning is that Sarah Ferguson was a big social figure in New York in this period, as was Ghislaine. And I think they met on the social circuit. The idea that Andrew would have met Ghislaine back in the 1980s when she was at Oxford just doesn't ring true. And the idea that there were other circles they mixed in, I think it happened through Sarah Ferguson. And she, as I say, was as friendly with Epstein as Andrew. And I know from sources, I mean, 3 different sources have got her staying at Epstein's flats up to 2015, including the doorman. So, when she says, I have nothing more to do with this man, how awful he is, that, cannot be true if this testimony from 3 different people is correct. I think the other thing is, she claimed that she'd only had £15,000 and she used to get papers to correct it if they said anything else. But £15,000 she wouldn't get out of bed for.
No.
Next girlfriend told me it was more like £2 million. And so, I think there's a lot more to this Epstein relationship that's come out. I mean, she should be talking to the FBI about what she saw. We know she went to Palm Beach. We know that she was stayed in Manhattan. I should say also that Deborah Gale, who was the housekeeper in Palm Beach, said that Andrew was a regular guest. He even had his own suite in Manhattan. It was called the Britannia Suite because he stayed so often. And time again, when he's given details of his trips, they actually fall apart when you examine them. He'll say, I went and opened an outward bound school in Boston. But actually, if you contact the outward bound school in Boston, they say, no, he didn't turn up. So even his police protection people will admit that there were gaps in his schedule when he could easily be seeing people, including Virginia Giuffre. So everything I found in my research backed up what Virginia Giuffre had said.
Wow. This is potentially huge because there is increasing speculation and talk from the world of MAGA that Ghislaine Maxwell will end up being pardoned by the Trump administration. But of course, part of that pardon would involve her blowing the whistle. Now, not necessarily on Andrew. It feels to me that the real political pressure is to go for the Democrats, the likes of Bill Clinton and those types of people who had always been sort of associated with Epstein. But do you think Ghislaine potentially being back in play, giving this evidence, potentially even testifying in public, puts Andrew under much more scrutiny? Because up until this point, and again, tell me if I'm wrong because you've looked much more closely at this, but Ghislaine has very much still remained in Andrew's corner.
Yes, she'll remain in his corner. I don't think she's going to give up anything on Andrew.
Okay.
I think what's going to happen is she's going to give the fifth when she's asked to testify. They're not really going to get anything. They will release material on a few low level people, and then perhaps have someone like Clinton that they throw to the wolves. And I don't think Clinton will be put in a position where he has to give a pardon. What will happen, I think, is that Ghislaine they will say will have to be moved to another prison for her own safety. They can't say where that prison is. And she's quietly driven down the road and given a ticket to the Caribbean and put under witness protection or whatever and allowed to disappear. Everyone thinking that she's still in prison and there's been no pardon. So that quietly gets Trump off the hook. He hasn't been seen to pardon a predator over the victims. Maxwell has got her deal. She's not dissed Trump, which is, of course, what he's most worried about. And she can go off into the sunset. And Andrew can hopefully breathe a sigh of relief, he thinks, because no one is now going to say anything. But as we found in this case, things do emerge. Legal depositions suddenly come from somewhere. People begin to speak out. And there's always this worry for him and indeed the rest of the royal family, what else is going to appear? So even if the Epstein story kind of dies a death, which I doubt it, there are always going to be stories about the financial corruption at the heart of the royal family, which is what I've been writing about. And those I'm already getting more stories just as a result of the publicity over the last week. So I've always felt that I had only the tip of the iceberg. And that's becoming clear as more and more people come forward with their stories and experiences.
Tash, do you feel Prince Andrew is under threat at all by Ghislaine Maxwell being back in play? Or actually, because the one thing that I will always say, and I've spoken a lot to Lady Colin Campbell about this, is that it does feel deeply unfair and deeply corrupt to me that the only two people in jail in the world over Jeffrey Epstein are Brits. That's bizarre to me.
It's a very murky, seedy world where we see these sort of big names, elites, politicians, any sort of people, the A-list Hollywood stars, all of these people that have been linked, very similar to the P. Diddy lists. We often see it where nobody is ever held accountable, and that's because they all look after their own, sadly. I don't believe Andrew is at risk. If he was, someone would have given the information over by now, including people that are inside prison. I think if given an opportunity to get out and to maybe start a new life under witness protection or whatever, you would give the names over. So I think that she is obviously going to hold on to any info that she might have on Andrew. I think if anybody was going to say anything, they would have done so by now. So I think Andrew already feels as protected as he always has been his entire life. So it's very sad whenever there's huge stories like this. I mean, the whole story just makes me want to have a shower, just even thinking about that person and everything that happened. But it is just the way that it works. Unfortunately, they all look out for each other and they will always cover up each other's tracks.
Andrew, who is to blame for this sort of creation of this oafish prince that you paint so superbly? Because I look at it and I think, well, he grew up in exactly the same way as, well, not exactly the same way, but, in similar ways as Princess Anne and Prince Edward, who I think you can say are two spares who have made something of their lives, who have maintained a credibility. And actually, I mean, I really only have positive things to say about Anne and Edward. No one's perfect. Again, no one's perfect. Few mistakes along the way. But you know the point that I'm making. On the whole, they pretty much have been brilliant ambassadors for the British royal family and the country and have worked really hard. What was it about Andrew that took him down this different path? Like, was there anything in the upbringing, for example?
The Sussexes have positioned themselves as outsiders and antagonists. William is said to believe there's no way back, and that their ongoing presence as royals in exile only undermines the crown. If Harry and Meghan are a political problem, Prince Andrew is a moral one. His association with Jeffrey Epstein, combined with his disastrous interview and settlement, has left him permanently disgraced. For William, allowing Andrew to remain connected to royal duties risks tainting the monarchy for good. The idea of banishing all three may sound ruthless, but insiders suggest William sees no alternative. He wants a streamlined monarchy, free from scandal, and centered on duty. That means Harry, Meghan, and Andrew, all of whom bring controversy rather than stability, would be cut out entirely.
Well, he's part of the second family, so and in some ways he was brought up as an only child until Edward was born, several years later. And I think the Queen was more indulgent to him in those first. He's born in February 60, and Edward is born in the spring of 65 or something. So he had this long period where he was spoilt by the Queen, who had more time now to devote to her family, and I think that sowed the seeds. You're absolutely right. I mean, no one has a bad word to say about Edward. He's been absolutely, I think is an adornment to the royal family. And this is what, concerns me, that people like Andrew bring down the edifice and the hard work that people like Edward do by their behavior. People have suggested that maybe Andrew has different genes. Who knows? I mean, different character. Maybe there's some sort of mental thing there. I mean, he was certainly kept away from the public for a while. I think there were concerns about something there. He behaves at times as if he's got Tourette's syndrome in the way, just the weird ways he behaves. So I think, it'd be very interesting to perhaps get a psychiatrist to look at his behavior and see if there is some explanation. I don't think it has. It is partly being spoilt and not having boundaries and knowing you could get away with things. I think partly it's other factors. I mean, the point is that, he also had a very similar education to Charles and Edward, but it's very revealing that Charles and Edward both became guardians at Gordonston, head boy, whereas Andrew didn't. And it's very clear from talking to the contemporaries at Gordonston that, the child is father of the man. His behavior at Gordonston, is being replicated now. He was lazy. He didn't do his homework, for example. I mean, we know he cheated to get through staff college, got someone else to take his paper. We see a whole repetition of behavior all the way through. And even when he's presented as the blue-eyed boy and the future of the monarchy and sent off on his own tours, he always self-sabotages them by doing something weird, by turning a paint gun on the journalists or being extremely rude to the residents of Lockerbie. So, he's an interesting psychological study, shall we say. And of course, the making of people like Edward were his wife. And unfortunately, Andrew didn't have that benefit.
Tash, what's your take on how Andrew ended up the way that he did?
Well, there seems to be a very strong similarity again with Harry. I mean, listening to you talk about the things that Andrew did when he was younger, if you didn't know that you were speaking about Prince Andrew, you'd be forgiven thinking that you were just telling, more recent stories about Prince Harry, getting into trouble, bullying people at school, not being, well, I would say being slightly academically challenged, getting people to cheat on your exams for you, taking credit for things, self-sabotaging, even when you're in the military and things, getting away with everything because they had no set boundaries. And it seems to be something very similar with Andrew and with Harry. They both had wives, rather than discouraging behavior like that. They brought out it to the surface and encouraged it, nurtured the worst bit about them. But there is definitely a similarity there. And one of the things I often wonder, is it because with obviously Diana dying, the Queen took on a more maternal role for William and Harry, and similar mistakes were made within the royal household for Harry, as were Andrew, that they spoiled them. They were treated slightly differently because they were the spare, and lessons perhaps weren't learnt with the fact that Andrew was becoming an unpleasant teenager and became an unpleasant man. And then you've seen the same thing the next generation down. So that I think there is something to do with perhaps the overindulgence of both of them. from a young age, never being told no, never having to take any responsibility for your actions, and always having other people to clean up your mess after you. What sort of person is that going to make you become? But then you do have Anne and Edward in that side of the family. And then, of course, you have Prince William. They all grew up in the same households, but they've turned out to be very different people. So there is something there that I think a psychiatrist would be someone that would definitely look into that. And there is definitely something very similar between uncle and nephew.
Andrew, what do you think is the future for Prince Andrew? I mean, how does this guy try and bring back any purpose to his life? Does he even think of trying to do that? I mean, so many times I'm like, this has now been going on for half a decade, right? Like, is there work being done behind the scenes to sort of try and prove that he has something to offer to the world?
No, I think it's all damage limitation. I mean, there were some attempts. I mean, during COVID, he accompanied Sarah Ferguson delivering some supplies to a charity, but he never enters into these things with a great deal of enthusiasm. So I think he doesn't particularly want to be absolved, and I don't think people want to absolve him. So he's kind of just going to be parked. It is a good, interesting question. He's 65. A lot of 65-year-olds go and play golf, see the grandchildren, watch videos, go for walks, and there's no reason why he shouldn't do the same. And I don't think he's quite under house arrest in the way that people suggest. I mean, talking to this ex-girlfriend of Andrew's, who actually she claims lived with him at Royal Lodge, she was coming in and out, and no one has ever noticed her being there. So there must be ways of in and out that he can be going off to go and play golf in Portugal, or go on a private jet to the Middle East and see some of his pals there. So I think it'll be just more of the same, and one just hopes that he's perhaps learned some of the lessons and is a little bit more discreet now in who he deals with, or that there is more supervision of him. I think one of the problems, both in the Navy and as special representative, was that he wasn't put focused when he was in the Falklands, and there was tight discipline, and he had to rise to the occasion. He actually did a very good job. The problem is, once he doesn't have that structure and people really working with him to focus him, then he gets up to all sorts of tricks.
Tash, do you think there's any way back? Is there any way that Andrew can? I mean, gosh, he might be around for 3 more decades.
No, I don't think in the eyes of the public. I do not think, with his association with Epstein, I think that has forever tarnished him. I believe, obviously then the interview that he did, thinking that would be an easy ride with Emily, and people, I don't think people would ever want to see him in any sort of role. I mean, this whole Epstein case is one of the worst cases in history, certainly in my lifetime, of all the awful things that went on. And how could he be in any sort of role where he would be somehow representing the monarchy? I mean, it's not just his involvement with Epstein, it's the fact national security risk. I mean, he's given intel and information to lots of spies. It's not just China, obviously, as Andrew discusses in his book. He's a complete liability. So I think that the best thing for Andrew would actually be a nice retirement out in the Middle East, and he could come back privately for private dinners. I don't think anybody would even want to see him on the balcony ever again. And I would say it'd be the same for Harry and Meghan. I don't think that they'd be accepted back either, because of their unforgivable treatment to the Queen and Prince Philip in their final years, because of the lies. Totally. And also perhaps they could be a risk to national security. He can't exactly be trusted with any sort of private information.
I think he is. I think he definitely is. Goodness me, Andrew. I mean, to release a book like this and have this level of impact, you must be absolutely delighted, but I know how hard you've worked on it. Congratulations. Let me just put this cover up again, entitled The Rise and Fall of the House of York. The bombshell book is out now. And Andrew, I know this is your first time on Outspoken, so please do come back soon. Have absolutely loved having you. I know you were on my former GB News show, but really great to have you on my new independent platform. Congratulations again.
Some believe William is right. The monarchy can't carry scandal-ridden figures into the future. Others argue such a move would appear cold, even vindictive, especially if it means permanently cutting ties with his own brother. But William, it seems, is determined to put the crown first, even above family bonds. The talk of banishment might sound extreme, but it signals a shift in royal strategy. For Prince William, the future of the monarchy may depend on who he chooses to carry forward and who he leaves behind. And if reports are true, Harry, Meghan, and Andrew may soon find themselves on the outside, permanently.